When she first walked into the music academy, no one really noticed her. She moved quietly, almost as if she didn't want to disturb anyone. Her clothes were simple, her steps soft, and her eyes carried a calm focus that most people overlooked. She wasn't the kind of person who tried to stand out. She didn't talk loudly, didn't make big gestures, and didn't try to impress anyone with exaggerated confidence. She simply entered the classroom, holding her old music folder close to her chest, hoping for a fresh start. The instructor looked at her for only a second before turning his attention back to the other students. He was known for being strict about music and even stricter about talent. He liked students who showed bold confidence from the start. Students who walked in with expensive instruments, shiny shoes, and loud introductions. To him, quietness often looked like weakness. Without even speaking to her, he placed her seat at the back, near the corner where a small window cast a thin line of sunlight across the floor. The room buzzed with energy as the other students talked and laughed. Some were warming up on the piano, letting their fingers run across the keys just to show they were skilled. Others were flipping through their sheet music, loudly discussing the challenging pieces they planned to perform. She listened to all of it silently. She didn't judge them and she didn't envy them. She just took a slow breath and waited for the class to begin. When the instructor finally spoke, his voice filled the room with authority. He introduced the upcoming community concert and explained that each student would perform one piece in front of a large audience. It was an event the academy took seriously. Families would come, local artists, teachers from other branches, even sponsors who supported young talent. The students buzzed with excitement, whispering about what they would play and how much applause they expected. She listened quietly, her hands resting on her lap. She wasn't afraid of the concert, even though she had never performed in front of such a large crowd before. She simply felt a small spark inside her chest, something warm and steady, reminding her of why she loved music. It wasn't the applause. It wasn't the attention. It was the feeling of creating something with her own hands, something honest and full of life. But to the instructor, her silence told a different story. He thought she was unsure. He thought she was shy, unprepared, and maybe even too fragile for a major performance. His eyes moved over her like she was a student who needed protection rather than challenge. He didn't see strength in her quietness. He saw uncertainty. And with that assumption, he decided she would probably choose a simple piece, something light and safe. He didn't ask her about her experience. He didn't ask her what she hoped to perform. He didn't even ask her if she felt ready. He simply moved on, giving detailed advice to the students who behaved loudly, confidently, and a little arrogantly. He praised them for their ambition and encouraged them to take on difficult compositions. She watched all of it from her corner seat with a soft, thoughtful expression. After the class introduced their planned pieces one by one, she stayed silent until the instructor finally turned toward her. He looked at her with polite courtesy but not genuine curiosity. "You'll probably want something easy for the concert," he said in a tone that wasn't unkind, but definitely underestimated her. "Something comfortable and not too heavy, right?" She shook her head gently. "I'd like to play something challenging," she said softly. Her voice was calm, not defensive, not proud, just honest. The room grew a bit quieter. Some students glanced at her with raised eyebrows. A few smirked. The instructor looked surprised for a moment. Then his polite smile returned. "Challenging?" he repeated, as if he wasn't sure he heard correctly. "Are you sure? For your first performance here, it's usually better to choose something simpler." She nodded again, still calm. "Yes, I'm sure." There was something in her eyes that made her look more confident than her words suggested. Not the loud confidence the instructor favored, but something deep inside, something steady and real. But he didn't see it clearly. Instead, he assumed she didn't fully understand what challenging truly meant. He believed she was making a mistake out of inexperience. He didn't argue further. He simply moved on, thinking she would eventually choose a more basic piece. But she knew exactly what she wanted. After class, while the other students packed up and rushed out, she stayed behind for a moment, letting the room empty. When the instructor left through the side door, She approached the piano slowly and gently placed her fingers on the keys. She didn't play loudly. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just let her hands glide across the keys in a soft, meaningful way, testing small parts of a very complex composition she had been practicing on her own. Unbeknownst to her, someone else was in the hallway, the janitor who had worked at the academy for years. He paused for a moment, listening through the opening in the doorway. He didn't know much about music in technical terms, but he knew when something sounded beautiful. And the way she played, even in those short moments, had a different kind of feeling. It wasn't the usual student showing off. It was gentle, emotional, and full of quiet confidence. She finished her small test run, lifted her hands from the piano, and let out a slow breath. Then she packed her folder and left the room without looking back. She didn't know anyone had heard her. She didn't care if anyone did. She wasn't playing for an audience. She was playing for herself. The next day, the instructor still treated her as someone who needed easy guidance. He checked on the louder students, giving them long explanations about techniques and stage presence. But for her, he simply said, "Let me know when you decide on a simpler piece. The concert is important." She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She simply gave a small nod and continued practicing quietly, ignoring the curious looks from classmates. They had already formed their opinion about her. They thought she was too gentle, too soft-spoken, too small in presence to deliver anything impressive on a big stage. But she had learned long ago that the world often misjudges people who don't announce themselves loudly. And she didn't need to announce anything. She knew what she carried inside: years of practice, hours of dedication, and a deep love for the piano that had stayed with her through every difficult moment in her life. She didn't tell anyone about the long nights she had spent practicing alone. She didn't talk about the old piano at home, slightly out of tune but full of memories. She didn't tell them how she had saved money for years to buy her own sheet music. She didn't need them to know. All she needed was a chance to show what she could do. But for now, no one in the academy believed she could handle the upcoming performance. Not even the instructor. And the more they underestimated her, the quieter she became, not out of fear, but because she understood something very simple. Sometimes silence is the strongest preparation. What none of them knew was that she had already chosen her piece, and it was far more difficult than anything the other students were attempting. She was ready for a challenge. She was ready to prove something, not to them but to herself. And when the concert day arrived, they would all remember the quiet girl they had ignored, for reasons they never expected. She spent most of her days at the academy quietly observing the other students. They practiced with loud determination, tapping their fingers on the piano keys with confidence, sometimes even pride, as if the sound of their own skill could fill the whole room. She didn't join in their chatter or boast about her own abilities. She simply watched, learned, and focused on her own goals. It was easy for people to underestimate her because she did not demand attention. But behind her calm face, there was a quiet fire, a steady determination that no one could see unless they watched her closely. After classes ended, while the other students rushed off to meet friends or attend other activities, she stayed behind. Sometimes she would practice on a piano in a nearly empty hall, the soft light from the windows falling across the worn keys. Sometimes she would sit and study music theory quietly, flipping through pages of notes that few people understood. It was in these moments, when the world seemed to fade away, that her dedication became visible. She did not need praise. She did not need applause. All she needed was the connection between herself and the music. The janitor, who had been at the academy for many years, started to notice her quiet routine. He was not a music expert, but he had a good ear for melody. Sometimes, when he was mopping the floor or tidying up the rooms, he would hear her playing a few notes through the half-closed doors. He noticed that there was something unusual about her playing. It was not just technical skill. It was emotional, it had feeling. It moved him in ways that even professional musicians sometimes could not. He never told anyone about it, but in his mind he started to quietly root for her. He saw what the instructor could not see, a hidden talent that was being ignored. Even her fellow students were unaware of the depth of her skill. They assumed she was just another quiet girl who would choose an easy piece for the upcoming concert. Some whispered among themselves, saying she should pick something simple so she wouldn't embarrass herself. A few curious ones, however, sometimes peeked into the hall when she stayed late. They caught glimpses of her hands moving with precision, of her eyes closed in concentration, and of the emotion she poured into every note. But still, they didn't truly understand her. They only saw parts of her, fragments that hinted at her capability. She had been practicing a difficult piece for weeks, something she had chosen herself because it challenged her technically and emotionally. It was a composition that required not only skill but also endurance and focus. She had worked on it slowly, section by section, making sure each note was perfect before moving on. Sometimes she would make small mistakes, and when she did, she would sigh softly, correct herself, and start over. It was a quiet, relentless process that no one noticed, and she liked it that way. She believed in steady, patient progress. She believed that hard work mattered more than showing off. Her parents had always encouraged her love of music, but they also knew that talent alone was not enough. They had taught her discipline, the importance of practice, and the patience required to achieve something meaningful. Every evening at home, she would sit at her piano, even when she was tired from school or other activities. She knew that every hour she spent now would be reflected in the music she would play later. It was not about winning competitions or applause. It was about mastery, about expressing something true. Back at the academy, the instructor still underestimated her. He gave long lectures to the students who spoke loudly and confidently, praising them for taking on complicated pieces and offering them guidance. To her, he offered polite instructions, often suggesting she take something easier. "It will be better for your first performance," he would say. "Something manageable, something you can feel comfortable with." She always nodded, but inside, she felt no hesitation. She knew what she could handle, and she knew she wanted a challenge. She never argued, she never tried to convince him. She simply continued her quiet preparation, day by day, note by note. Sometimes she would encounter small difficulties, parts of the composition that seemed almost impossible to master. She would pause, close her eyes, and imagine the music in her mind. She would think about the story behind the notes, the emotions she wanted to convey, and then return to the piano with renewed focus. It was a methodical process. She didn't rush and she didn't panic. She believed that patience and persistence were more powerful than speed or showiness. Her classmates occasionally tried to engage her, asking why she chose such a difficult piece or commenting on how quiet she always was. She would smile softly and answer simply, "I like it." She did not feel the need to explain further. Her simplicity, her calmness, sometimes made others uncomfortable. They were used to loud ambition and visible confidence. Her quiet determination was foreign to them, and so they underestimated her even more. The academy itself was a place filled with energy, competition, and sometimes gossip. Students would compare themselves with one another, discuss who had the most talent, who was likely to be chosen for the main stage, and who was falling behind. She never participated in these conversations. She didn't care about comparisons. She didn't need validation from others. Her motivation came from within. She was driven by a personal standard, a desire to reach her own potential, and an understanding that real talent often grows quietly before it is seen by the world. As the days passed, the community concert drew closer. The excitement among the students grew. They began practicing more, talking about stage presence, and imagining the applause that would follow. She, too, felt anticipation, but it was different. It was not about being noticed or praised. It was about being ready, about ensuring that when the moment came, she could play the piece exactly as she imagined it, with every note reflecting the effort, the patience, and the emotion she had put into it. There were nights when she practiced at home until her fingers were sore. Sometimes she would sit at the piano and feel frustrated when a difficult part would not sound right. She would pause, breathe deeply, and start again. She had learned that mastery required persistence. It was not enough to play a piece perfectly once or twice. It had to be internalized, felt in the fingertips, the mind, and the heart. She treated each practice session as a small step toward a larger goal, knowing that each note she perfected now would shine during the concert. Even though the instructor did not notice, her dedication was visible in small ways. Her posture at the piano, her attention to detail, the precision in her fingers, and the subtle expressions of emotion on her face. All of it revealed a commitment that was far beyond what most students her age displayed. She had learned to be her own critic, to push herself gently but firmly, and to embrace challenges rather than shy away from them. One afternoon, as she stayed late practicing, the janitor happened to pass by. He paused outside the door, listening for a moment. The music flowed through the hallway, not loud or flashy, but full of meaning. He smiled quietly, shaking his head in amazement. "There's something special about her," he whispered to himself. "She doesn't even know how powerful she is." He went about his work, careful not to disturb her, but his silent encouragement stayed with her, even though she never knew he was there. Other students began to notice small things too. They would catch glimpses of her practicing complex sequences that most of them struggled with. They saw her confidence in handling tricky parts, her ability to maintain calm under pressure, and her focus that never wavered. Some began to wonder if maybe they had underestimated her. But few dared to ask, and most still assumed that she would fail under the pressure of a live audience. They thought her quiet demeanor meant she lacked the boldness required for a stage performance. Despite being overlooked, she never felt discouraged. She knew that talent was not about appearances or loud voices. It was about patience, understanding, and a deep connection to what one was doing. She had built her skill over years of study, quiet dedication, and careful practice. The music she played was not for showing off. It was for expressing something that words could not capture. And that expression, she knew, would eventually be understood by those who truly listened. As the final days before the concert approached, her confidence grew quietly. She felt prepared in a way that no other student could understand because she had invested herself completely, not just in learning the notes, but in understanding the emotion behind them. Every phrase, every pause, every dynamic change had been considered carefully. She was ready to play not just with skill, but with heart, and she knew that when she performed, it would be different from anything the audience expected. No one at the academy realized that the quiet girl in the back was holding a secret strength. She had a plan, a piece of music that would challenge her, move the audience, and perhaps even surprise those who had underestimated her. She did not boast. She did not announce her intentions. She simply continued her practice, note by note, day by day, confident that the results would speak for themselves when the time came. And so, while others prepared loudly, sought recognition, and hoped for praise, she prepared silently, with patience, dedication, and a love for the music that went deeper than anyone around her could see. Her journey toward the concert was not just about learning a difficult piece. It was about proving, quietly but surely, that dedication and quiet strength often outshine the loudest voices. The day of the community concert arrived, and the academy was buzzing with nervous energy. Students hurried through hallways, checking their sheet music, warming up on pianos, and whispering words of encouragement to each other. Parents and family members began to fill the seats, chatting excitedly and taking photos. Some of the older students who had performed before gave advice, tips on stage presence and hand positioning, trying to calm the nerves of those who were performing for the first time. The halls smelled faintly of polished wood and music sheets, mixed with the soft scent of flowers from the decorations in the auditorium. She arrived at the academy early, carrying her folder with her sheet music neatly arranged. She had dressed simply, choosing comfort over flashy clothes. She wanted nothing to distract her from the music she was about to play. As she entered the hall, she noticed the nervous chatter of other students, the fidgeting fingers, the hurried last-minute scales. She felt a small pang of nerves herself, but it was different from the anxious energy around her. Her nerves were quiet, calm, and focused, a reminder that this moment had been coming for weeks, months even. She was ready even if no one else expected it. The instructor arrived shortly after, moving through the hall with his usual authoritative presence. He glanced at the students, offering brief words of encouragement to some and polite advice to others. When he looked at her, he gave a small nod, but there was a shadow of doubt in his eyes. He still assumed she would struggle, that her quiet confidence would collapse under the weight of the audience. He didn't know that she had been preparing for this moment for weeks, that every note in her piece had been studied and mastered with patience and care. Backstage, the students lined up in order of performance. The excited chatter of some students faded to nervous whispers. A few were rehearsing quietly, running through the notes in their heads, their hands hovering over imaginary keys. She stood at the edge of the stage, quietly reviewing her sheet music in her mind. She didn't pace, she didn't fidget. She simply breathed deeply and imagined the music flowing from her fingers, each phrase precise and full of emotion. A small group of students huddled together, whispering, "Do you really think she can do it?" one asked. "She's so quiet. She's never really shown much in class." Another shrugged, glancing toward her. "I don't know. She seems calm, but I can't see her handling a big audience." They didn't know she had spent long nights at home and in the academy practicing this exact piece. They didn't know she had mastered every difficult part, polished every phrase, and poured her heart into every note. They only saw the quiet girl in the corner, calm and unassuming. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage with a gentle confidence. She didn't rush, and she didn't make dramatic gestures. The hall was filled with expectant faces, but she paid them little mind. She approached the piano, laid her folder down, and positioned her fingers carefully on the keys. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a slow, deep breath. She felt the familiar connection between herself and the music, a bond that made the world outside the stage disappear. The first notes she played were soft, almost tentative, but perfectly in tune. They flowed from her fingers with a quiet strength, and the audience, at first listening politely, began to notice the depth of her playing. The melody was not just correct in terms of technique, it carried feeling, emotion, and a story that could be understood without words. Parents glanced at each other, some leaning forward, sensing that this performance was unlike anything they expected. The instructor, standing to the side, felt a surprise that he hadn't anticipated. His eyes widened slightly as he realized that the girl he had underestimated was commanding the piano with a skill that rivaled his most advanced students. He watched closely, trying to understand how someone so quiet, so unassuming, could convey so much through her music. For the first time, he began to question his assumptions about appearances and confidence. As she continued, the music grew more complex. The difficult passages that many students avoided flowed seamlessly from her fingers. Her hands moved with precision, yet each note carried a natural, emotional rhythm. The audience could feel it. They didn't just hear music. They felt it. Some listeners were moved to tears, unable to resist the beauty and intensity of her performance. The hall, which had been filled with nervous energy moments before, became silent, absorbed completely by her music. Even her classmates, who had doubted her ability, watched in awe. They whispered among themselves, realizing that they had misjudged her entirely. The quiet girl in the back had prepared diligently, practiced relentlessly, and now she was showing a strength they hadn't imagined. They felt a mix of admiration and surprise, realizing that talent is not always loud, and determination does not always announce itself. She did not rush through the piece. She felt every note, every pause, every crescendo and decrescendo. She imagined the story behind the music, the feelings that the composer had intended, and translated them into her own expression. It was a performance that required not only technical skill but also emotional understanding, and she had both in abundance. The audience responded instinctively, leaning forward in their seats, following the flow of her music, caught up in the journey she was creating with her hands and heart. The final notes approached, and she played them with a gentle flourish that emphasized the emotion she had built throughout the piece. There was a moment of silence, just a fraction of a second, where the hall seemed to hold its breath. Then, as the last note faded, the audience erupted into applause. It was spontaneous, heartfelt, and growing louder by the second. Some stood, some clapped vigorously, and some whispered words of admiration to each other. The music had touched them deeply, far beyond what anyone had expected from her. The instructor, who had stood quietly throughout her performance, felt a mix of pride and surprise. He had misjudged her, underestimated her ability, and now he realized how wrong he had been. He approached the stage as she rose from the piano, giving her a small but sincere nod. His respect for her skill had grown in those few minutes, and he knew that this performance would remain in his memory for a long time. She smiled softly, bowing slightly to the audience. She felt calm, even as applause filled the room. She had done what she had set out to do. She had played the piece exactly as she had imagined, with precision, emotion, and a quiet strength that no one had seen coming. She had proven to herself, above all else, that dedication and hard work could overcome doubt and underestimation. After she stepped off the stage, she was met with curious glances from other students and parents alike. Some came forward to congratulate her, amazed by her performance. The janitor, who had been quietly watching from the side, smiled proudly, remembering the many evenings he had heard her practice. He knew then, without a doubt, that her talent was genuine and extraordinary. The rest of the students who were waiting to perform felt a mixture of nervousness and awe. They realized that the standard for the concert had just been raised, not through flashy showmanship, but through quiet dedication and genuine skill. The room buzzed with a new energy, a quiet respect for the girl who had walked in unassuming, only to leave a powerful mark on everyone who had heard her. As the concert continued, people could not stop talking about her performance. They remembered her calm presence, the gentle flow of her music, and the depth of emotion she had conveyed. She had transformed the perception of everyone in the room, proving that strength is not always visible, and that sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest talent. The instructor reflected on his own behavior. He realized that assumptions based on appearance or demeanor could be misleading. He had focused on outward confidence and overlooked the inner strength that comes from true preparation and dedication. That day, he learned a valuable lesson about judging others too quickly. Meanwhile, she returned to the backstage quietly, without making a show of her success. She didn't seek praise or recognition. She simply felt a sense of satisfaction, a quiet happiness that her music had spoken for itself. She knew she had reached a milestone in her journey, and that the real reward was the personal achievement of expressing herself fully, without compromise. Even after the concert, as the audience left and the hall slowly emptied, the memory of her performance lingered. People would talk about it for weeks, remembering how a quiet girl had captured the hearts of everyone in the room with her music. And for her, the experience was a confirmation of her path, a reminder that patience, dedication, and quiet confidence often lead to the most remarkable outcomes. No one would forget that day, not the audience, not her classmates, not even the instructor. She had shown that talent is not always visible, and that true dedication shines when it is least expected. And as she walked home that evening, carrying her sheet music and feeling the calm satisfaction of a challenge met, she knew that this was only the beginning of what she could achieve. The moment she sat down at the piano, a quiet hush fell over the audience. They had already witnessed several students perform, some with skill, some with more confidence than ability, but nothing had prepared them for what was about to unfold. The girl's fingers hovered over the keys for a brief second, as if she were listening to the music inside her mind before letting it escape into the room. Then, with a gentle touch, she began to play. The first notes were soft, deliberate, and precise. They filled the hall with a melody that seemed to flow effortlessly. There was no rush, no need to impress anyone with speed or force. Each note carried its own weight, its own emotion. The audience, initially polite and quiet, began to lean forward, sensing the depth of the music. They were drawn into a story that the girl told without words, a story of patience, dedication, and quiet strength. Her instructor, who had watched her first few notes with mild curiosity, slowly straightened in his seat. His eyebrows rose as he realized that the girl he had underestimated was performing with a mastery that surpassed many of the older, more confident students. Her posture was relaxed but focused, her fingers dancing across the keys with grace, precision, and a surprising power. It was the kind of playing that did not just show technical skill, but also a deep understanding of the music's soul. As the piece progressed, the music grew more complex. There were moments that required swift finger movements, sudden changes in tempo, and precise control of dynamics. Yet she handled every challenge effortlessly. Her hands seemed to float above the keys, responding instinctively to every phrase. The audience could hear the care she had taken, the countless hours of practice, and the love she had for the music. Each note was intentional, each pause meaningful. It was as if the piano had become an extension of her own heart and mind. Parents in the front rows sat in stunned silence, some holding back tears. They had expected a modest performance from a quiet student, but what they heard was extraordinary. The music did not just fill the room. It carried them on a journey of emotion, evoking feelings of hope, longing, and quiet joy. Even the younger children in the audience were captivated, their eyes wide as they followed every movement of her hands. Her classmates whispered to one another, unable to hide their astonishment. "How is she doing that?" one asked, barely audible. "I didn't know she could play like this," another replied. They realized that their assumptions had been completely wrong. The quiet girl in the corner, whom they had overlooked and dismissed, was now holding the entire hall in her hands. It was a lesson they would not soon forget. Backstage, some of the older students who had performed earlier peeked through the curtains. They had been proud of their own efforts, confident in their abilities, but now they felt a pang of humility. They saw how the audience was completely absorbed, how every listener was captivated, and they understood that talent sometimes speaks in ways that confidence alone cannot. The instructor, now fully attentive, felt a mix of emotions. He had been wrong to judge her based on her quiet demeanor. He had doubted her skills, assumed she would struggle, and even thought she might fail. But as he listened, he realized that she had more than just skill. She had understanding, patience, and a depth of emotion that few students possessed. He sat silently, almost holding his breath, watching her transform the piano into a voice that spoke to everyone present. There were moments in the piece where the music became delicate and almost fragile. She played these sections with such subtlety that the audience leaned in, sensing the vulnerability behind the notes. Then, suddenly, the music would swell, full of strength and emotion, showing a contrast that made the performance even more compelling. She moved between quiet reflection and powerful expression seamlessly, as if she had lived the story of the music herself. Even the janitor, who had witnessed her practicing quietly for weeks, felt a sense of pride and awe. He had known she was talented, but seeing her perform in front of a live audience was something entirely different. He understood then that her quiet dedication had prepared her for this exact moment, and that her strength was more than anyone could have imagined. The audience responded instinctively. Some whispered words of amazement, others held their breath during the most difficult passages, and when she played the most emotional sections, a few people quietly dabbed at their eyes. This was not a performance meant to impress superficially. It was a performance that reached into hearts and stayed there. Each note seemed to tell a story of struggle, patience, and triumph, and the audience could feel it deeply. Her classmates, who had been so confident earlier in the day, now looked at her with new respect. They understood that their assumptions about her had been completely wrong. They had measured her by her quiet demeanor, but she had shown that true talent is not always loud or flashy. Sometimes it is patient, steady, and emerges only when it is needed most. As the piece approached its final moments, the music built to a powerful conclusion. She played with precision, emotion, and confidence. Every note was carefully placed, every phrase intentional. The hall seemed to hold its breath as she moved through the last few measures. When she struck the final chord, there was a brief moment of silence, a pause that allowed the audience to absorb the beauty of what they had just heard. Then the applause began. It started softly, almost tentatively, and then grew louder and louder, until the entire hall was filled with the sound of clapping, cheers, and whistles. People rose to their feet, unable to contain their admiration. They had expected a modest performance, but what they had witnessed was extraordinary. The quiet girl had completely captivated them, leaving a lasting impression that would not fade easily. The instructor stood, clapping along with the audience, a mixture of pride, surprise, and humility in his eyes. He approached her as she rose from the piano, his expression serious but sincere. "I misjudged you," he said quietly. "I underestimated your talent. That was remarkable." She smiled gently, acknowledging his words, but without pride or arrogance. She had not performed for praise. She had performed because she loved the music and wanted to share it fully. After leaving the stage, she was met with congratulations from the audience, the janitor, and even her fellow students. People were curious about how she had prepared, what motivated her, and how she could play with such depth and skill. She answered politely, simply, and with humility. She did not boast. She did not exaggerate her abilities. She had let the music speak for itself, and it had done so beautifully. The rest of the students waiting to perform felt a mixture of awe and nervousness. They realized that the standard had been set, not through flashy showmanship, but through quiet dedication and true mastery. Her performance had shown them that preparation, patience, and focus could surpass outward confidence and bold gestures. It was a lesson that would stay with them long after the concert ended. The audience continued to talk about her performance long after she returned to her seat. They remembered the grace of her fingers, the precision of her playing, and the emotional depth she conveyed. People who had never attended a piano concert before were moved to tears. People who had performed in public themselves were humbled by her skill. Everyone left with the same thought. This quiet girl had achieved something extraordinary. Even after the applause faded, she remained calm. She did not seek further attention or recognition. She had achieved what she wanted. She had played her piece perfectly, with emotion and skill, and she had shared something meaningful with the audience. For her, that was enough. She had proven to herself that dedication and quiet confidence could lead to remarkable results. The instructor, still reflecting on the performance, knew he had learned a lesson he would not forget. He had judged her too quickly, assumed too much based on appearances, and underestimated her determination. Her playing had reminded him that talent is often hidden, that quiet students may carry remarkable skill, and that judging too soon can lead to missed opportunities. She left the concert hall quietly, holding her sheet music, feeling a quiet satisfaction in her chest. The world had seen a small part of her dedication, and it had responded with admiration and respect. She knew this was just one step in her journey, but it was an important one. She had learned that true talent, patience, and commitment often speak louder than any display of confidence or bravado. And as she walked home that evening, listening to the fading echoes of applause in her mind, she felt a sense of quiet joy. She had played not for recognition or praise, but because it was her path, her expression, and her dedication. The music had flowed through her, and in that moment, it had been understood, felt, and remembered by everyone who had listened. After the concert, the energy in the academy lingered long into the evening. The students who had performed earlier or waited for their turn were still buzzing, replaying the music in their minds, whispering about the incredible performance they had just witnessed. Even those who had doubted her ability now looked at her differently, some with quiet admiration, others with a new sense of respect they hadn't felt before. She moved through the hall with her folder in hand, calm and composed, her expression soft but reflective. She had done what she had set out to do, but she did not let the praise distract her from the quiet pride she felt inside. Her instructor approached her once more, now with a seriousness that was different from the polite detachment he had carried before the concert. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly, almost hesitating before the words left his lips. "I misjudged your ability, and I underestimated the strength of your dedication. What you did tonight, it was remarkable." She looked at him with a gentle nod, acknowledging his words but without showing any pride. She had not performed to prove him or anyone else wrong. She had performed to show herself what she was capable of, and in doing so, she had surpassed even her own expectations. The instructor studied her for a moment, noting the calmness in her eyes and the quiet confidence that had guided every note she had played. He realized that talent and dedication are not always visible at first glance. Some students announce their skill with loud gestures and confident posturing, but others carry it quietly, like a hidden fire that only reveals itself in the right moment. He understood now that he had been too quick to judge, and that lesson weighed on him as he watched her leave the stage area. Backstage, a few of her classmates had gathered, still processing what they had witnessed. Some spoke in hushed tones, trying not to disturb the next performers. "I never knew she could play like that," one whispered, eyes wide. Another added, "All those hours she spent practicing alone. It shows. She didn't need anyone to tell her what to do. She just knew." They realized that they had overlooked her for reasons that had nothing to do with her actual talent. Their assumptions had blinded them to her dedication and skill. The quiet girl who had sat in the back, unnoticed and underestimated, had proven more than they could have imagined. She walked through the hallway, her footsteps soft against the polished floor, carrying a calm awareness of what she had accomplished. People stopped her to offer congratulations, their voices warm and sincere. Some asked her about her practice routine, how she had prepared for such a difficult piece, and what inspired her to choose it. She smiled politely at each question, answering simply and honestly, never exaggerating her efforts or claiming more than she had done. She had allowed her music to speak, and it had done so more effectively than any words could. The janitor, who had watched her grow quietly over the weeks, lingered in the hallway, smiling as she passed by. He had witnessed her late-night practices, her unwavering commitment, and her quiet patience. Seeing her now, having achieved something remarkable in front of an audience, filled him with pride. He had known she was talented, but witnessing her share it with the world was something entirely different. He felt as though he had been given a glimpse into the true measure of her dedication and heart. As the evening wore on, she gathered her things and prepared to leave. The audience had slowly begun to empty, and the remaining students were finishing their conversations about the performances. She walked outside into the cool evening air, feeling the gentle relief of having completed the concert successfully. There was no rush, no fanfare. She didn't need recognition beyond the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had played the music as she intended, with every note expressing her commitment, skill, and love for the piano. Her thoughts wandered back to the months of preparation, the long hours of practice, and the moments of doubt she had faced alone. She remembered struggling with difficult passages, pausing to breathe deeply, imagining the music in her mind, and starting over until it felt perfect. Those quiet moments, unseen and unnoticed by anyone, had led her to this performance. She understood now that the patience and discipline she had cultivated were just as important as the technical skill she had developed. They had prepared her for the moment when she would truly shine. The instructor, meanwhile, reflected on the lessons of the evening. He thought about the assumptions he had made, judging her by her quiet demeanor rather than by her abilities. He realized that this experience would change the way he viewed students in the future. He would look more carefully, listen more closely, and remember that dedication and talent can be hidden beneath calm exteriors. The girl's performance had left a lasting impression on him, a reminder that teaching required understanding the whole person, not just the outward display of confidence or skill. In the following days, her performance continued to be the topic of conversation throughout the academy. Students who had doubted her ability spoke of her in a new light, recognizing that her quiet determination had carried her through challenges that others might have avoided. Parents and audience members who had been present at the concert praised her skill and emotional depth, recalling the moments when the music had seemed to touch the heart of everyone listening. Her name began to carry a quiet respect, not because she sought it, but because her performance had earned it naturally. Despite the recognition she was receiving, she remained humble. She continued to practice diligently, returning to the piano with the same patience and focus that had guided her before the concert. She knew that mastery required consistent effort, and that one remarkable performance, while memorable, was only part of a larger journey. She didn't let praise or applause distract her from her ongoing pursuit of growth, understanding, and expression through music. Her motivation remained intrinsic, driven by her love for the piano and her desire to explore its depth. Her classmates began to approach her more often, seeking advice, guidance, or simply to watch her practice. Some were inspired by her calm confidence. Others were curious about her methods. She shared what she could, always encouraging others to practice patiently, to focus on understanding the music rather than seeking attention, and to find their own path to improvement. She never positioned herself as superior. She simply demonstrated through her example the power of dedication and quiet persistence. Over time, her story became a lesson for the academy. Teachers and students alike reflected on how assumptions could mislead, and how talent often reveals itself only when given the space and opportunity to do so. She had become an example not for boastful display, but for the enduring strength that comes from preparation, patience, and commitment. Her journey reminded everyone that appearances can be deceptive, and that true skill often grows quietly, nurtured by dedication and love for the craft. The instructor, especially, changed the way he approached teaching. He learned to observe more carefully, to encourage students who were not immediately visible in their confidence, and to recognize the quiet ones who carried hidden potential. Her performance had demonstrated that success was not always about being loud or flashy, but about commitment, patience, and depth. He carried this lesson forward, guiding other students with a renewed understanding of what it meant to nurture talent. As for her, life returned to its usual rhythm. She continued her practice at the academy and at home, each session reinforcing her skill, her patience, and her emotional connection to the music. She performed in smaller gatherings, sometimes in local events, but always with the same quiet dedication and focus that had brought her to that remarkable concert. She didn't need constant recognition. The satisfaction of achieving her goals and expressing herself fully was enough. Months later, when students or teachers recalled the concert, they remembered it not just as a performance, but as a turning point. The quiet girl who had been underestimated had shown everyone that determination, preparation, and emotional connection to one's work could surpass assumptions and surprise even the most experienced observers. Her story became a reminder that patience, dedication, and a love for what one does often speak louder than outward confidence or appearances. She carried this understanding with her into every performance thereafter. Each note she played, each phrase she shaped, reflected the journey she had undertaken. The quiet nights of practice, the persistence through challenges, and the unwavering belief in herself. Her success was not defined by applause alone, but by the realization that true achievement comes from dedication, patience, and the courage to pursue what one loves, even when others do not immediately recognize the potential. The instructor occasionally shared her story with new students at the academy. He would describe her dedication, her patience, and her quiet strength, encouraging students to look beyond appearances, to work steadily, and to trust in their own abilities. She became, without seeking it, a symbol of the power of preparation and perseverance. Students who were once overlooked or underestimated found hope in her example, learning that quiet confidence and steady dedication could achieve remarkable outcomes. For her, the journey continued quietly but steadily. She did not seek fame or applause. She sought mastery, understanding, and the ability to communicate through her music. Each performance, whether in a small room or on a larger stage, was an opportunity to express herself fully, to connect with others, and to honor the work she had put into developing her skill. She knew that the journey itself, the patience and dedication behind every note, was just as important as the moments when others listened and admired. And in this way, she moved forward, quietly confident, deeply skilled, and fully aware of the strength she carried inside. The concert had revealed her to the world, but it had also reminded her that her true achievement lay not in the applause or recognition, but in the patience, love, and commitment she had brought to her music every single day. She understood that this was only the beginning of a lifetime of learning, growing, and sharing her talent in ways that would continue to inspire and touch the hearts of those who listened.